The psalmist cries out, Hoshi'eni Elohim ki va'umayim ad nafesh. Deliver me, God, for the waters have reached my neck, have threatened to destroy my very being. I am sunk in deep mire where there's no standing. Let the floodwaters not sweep me away. Let the deep not swallow me up. Earlier this week, I was talking with Shamir about our special Torah reading today. The moment before the waters part feels ominously familiar, he suggested. This collective instance of national struggle, the sense of feeling trapped by an authoritarian inclined government, the unmaking of civil society, the assault on higher education, the environment, the economy, on women, on LGBTQ people, on immigrants, science, the rule of law, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and so much more. Are we not being pushed into the deep by some menacing force? How long before we're swallowed by the sea? There's a famous legend that I'm sure most of us know of an ordinary hero who meets the moment. Recall the scene: the Hebrews are fleeing Egypt, having just witnessed the death of the Egyptian firstborn. They nibble on their flatbread as they attempt to schlep all the worldly possessions through the desert sand. And suddenly there they are, between Scylla and Charybdis, the expanse of the sea in front of them, the Egyptian army gaining behind, and out of the crowd steps Nachshon ben Aminadav. He steps into the water, goes the legend until it surrounds his ankles and then his knees. Now he's wading deeper still until at last the waters of Yam Suf reach his nostrils. And it's at that moment, with Nachshon gasping for air, that God parts the sea. In that splendid moment, when one man enables his faith to conquer his fears, the entire people is saved. Now, the story of Nachshon exists in a few different places in the Midrash. Some versions have the different tribes clamoring for pole position. They all want to be into the sea first. And the verse I cited earlier, "Deliver me, God, for the waters have reached my neck," is the psalmist's way of imagining the triumph of Nachshon in that perilous moment. Now stay with me. There's an elegance of citing this particular book of the Bible. In fact, the story shows up also in Midrash Tehillim, the Midrash on Psalms, as a justification for Judah's holiness. Why is that important? Nachshon, you see, is the prince of Judah, 5 generations removed from King David, who by Jewish tradition authors what book? The book of Psalms. So placing the Psalms into Nachshon's mouth is also a move of uplifting the monarchy. But another version offers a debate, actually, between two parties. Rabbi Meir says each of the tribes wanted to go first, but Rabbi Yehuda says exactly the opposite was true. Ela ze omer ein ani yored tchila layam, v'ze omer ein ani yored tchila layam. All of the tribes insist that someone else ought to be first into the sea. And then, kafatz Nachshon ben Aminadav vayarad layam tchila. So Nachshon, the brave, jumps in. But here's the problem. And it's something that's always bothered me about this tale. The solitary redeemer, the everyday hero, they make for great protagonists to any good story, but I'm not sure that that's how history actually works. Donald Trump's assault on the underpinnings of this country is not just a war on various marginalized people. It's a war on democracy itself. We don't live in a monarchy. America was founded on one salient principle: power derives not from a king, but from the people. The great man theory of history says that great and terrible men are only unmade by other great and heroic men. Now, there's some truth to this, of course, but it discounts the countless ways ordinary people shape history. As David Brooks, citing authors Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan, wrote this week, the only way to stop an authoritarian assault is for mass movements to utilize the many tools at their disposal: lawsuits, mass rallies, strikes, work slowdowns, boycotts, and other forms of non-cooperation and resistance. To reestablish the power vested by our Constitution in the people, we will need both charismatic and brave leaders, but no less a concerted, strategic, and sustainable coalition. The collective failure of this administration must be countered by a powerful, nonviolent counterinsurgency. Trump came into the American political scene as a different collective failure was being exposed here in Baltimore and around the country. 10 years ago today, on April 19th, 2015, Freddie Gray died in police custody. His death was a travesty, a collective failure of 6 police officers, none of whom was held accountable, but all of whom were collectively responsible for taking a young man into custody and treating him in such a way as to cause his untimely death. The protests of that April, in which I and many Beth Amers took part, the ensuing mass racial justice movement of 2020, these surely did not solve the problem of police brutality or systemic racism. But I think it's fair to say that the protests, the awareness raising of the past decade, the consent decree coupled with community and police-based gun violence reduction strategies have moved a number of things, attitudes, policy, police accountability, in the right direction. There's very far still to go. There's been some backtracking, but there also have been some victories. And this weekend marks another historic anniversary, one that points to collective success, victory against terrible odds. Not 10, but 250 years ago yesterday, one man did not stand up on a podium and give a great speech. He didn't stand at the head of an army. He rode a horse from Old North Church toward Lexington and Concord to alert the Minutemen that the British fleet had arrived to Boston Harbor. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April, 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. And I'll skip to the end. In the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. The greatness of Paul Revere, what makes him the perfect American folk hero, is that he was a silversmith, a man on a horse who alerted a civilian army to rise up and resist a tyrannical king. Wherever you are, it's probably Egypt, writes Michael Walzer in one of my favorite passages about Pesach from his book Exodus and Revolution. There's a better place, a promised land. The only way to this promised land is through the wilderness, and there's no way to get there except by joining together and marching. It is the collective effort, and only that, which will win the day. Which brings us back to Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. As our people cower at the water's edge, the growing din of chariots approaching, the battle cry of the Egyptians beyond Nachshon, before Moshe and his staff, there was another collective moment of resistance. Pesach, you see, is actually the story about birth. Our people's delivery, pun intended, concludes when the waters part and the people pass through to freedom, but it begins back in Egypt, back in Mitzrayim, literally the narrow place. A pharaoh has arisen who does not know Joseph. With no provocation, he enslaves our ancestors, citing the pretext of our numbers, our birth rate. Aside from forced labor, Pharaoh deploys an even more sinister ploy, forced birth control. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the first act of resistance comes when the midwives who choose not to act not to follow orders, to deny Pharaoh his genocidal intentions and allow life to flourish. But the king of Egypt will not stop until he gets his way. So he makes a public decree. Kol haben hayilod hayaora tashlechuhu v'chol habat techayun. Every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. The very next thing the Torah tells us is that a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. These people will come to learn to have a son named Aaron and a daughter named Miriam. Two midrashim grow out of the gap between chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus. One is a delicious tale of how to forestall Hebrew birth rates. Pharaoh decreed that the Israelites were not to sleep at home. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta suggests the women took matters into their own hand. They prepared picnic lunches with wine and fish in the fields, and they seduced their husbands with mirrors. So great was this act of rebellion, says the Midrash, that these very mirrors later became incorporated into the holy Mishkan itself. But the second tale is powerfully subversive in its own way, because it challenges the great man theory of history. Tana, Amram Gadol Hador Haya. It is taught in the Gemara, Amram was the great man of his generation. Once he saw that the wicked Pharaoh said, every son that is born you shall cast it into the river, he said, we are laboring for nothing. Therefore, he arose and divorced his wife. All the others saw this and followed his example, and they arose and divorced their own wives. His daughter, says the Midrash, his daughter Miriam said to him, Father, your decree is harsher than that of Pharaoh, as Pharaoh decreed only with regard to the males, but you prevent the existence of both males and females. Additionally, Pharaoh the wicked, who knows if his decree will actually be fulfilled, but you are a righteous person, and as such, your decrees will certainly be fulfilled. So Amram arose and brought back his wife. And all the other men then arose and brought back their wives as well. So this, says the Talmud, is why the Torah says, Vayelech ish mi beit Levi. Where did he go exactly, this man of Levi? He went and listened to the advice of his daughter. The story of the Exodus is a tale of our people's birth through an insistence on life. The midwives, they play their part. The Hebrew women organize a movement of resistance, creating life and even insisting on pleasure. This coming week marks Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. How many stories do we know of marriages, children who entered the world in the ghettos, even in the camps, in the worst of circumstances? How many stories exist in this country? From the days of chattel slavery, where families were formed despite the enslaved being viewed and treated as less than human. Of people like Hilmar Abrego Garcia and his wife Jennifer, who insisted on creating a family, raising children, building a life despite having fled violence in another land, who now face the violent designs of a new tyranny. The Passover story is made possible, yes, also through the leadership of a great man, but a man who would not have existed but for the leadership and vision of his sister, his mother, and a bit grudgingly, it seems, another great man, his father. The steady births in chapters 1 and 2 of Shemot make possible the birth of our people in chapter 15. As Hebrew University professor Ilana Pardes writes in her book, The Biography of Ancient Israel, the Israelites are delivered collectively out of the womb of Egypt. National birth, much like individual births, and all the more so in ancient times, takes place on a delicate border between life and death. God performs a variety of wonders in Egypt, but the parting of the Red Sea seems to surpass them all. It marks the nation's first breath out in the open air and serves as a distinct reminder of the miraculous character of the birth. Where there was nothing, a living creature emerges, she writes. Hoshi'eni Elohim ki va'u mayim ad nafesh. Deliver me, God, for the waters have reached my neck. I don't remember my birth. I was young. But I remember my kid's birth. And I remember how hard Miriam, my Miriam, worked to bring them into the world. The improbable becoming inevitable, the miraculous gift of life. My friends, these are uncertain times, but there are so many small and essential life-giving things that we can do, that we must do. Pesach is Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. May we never take it for granted. And may we work to ensure that our collective experience of suffering and liberation helps to ensure the flourishing of life wherever possible. As Paul Revere said, as Longfellow wrote, "One if by land, two if by sea." Yes, the sea stands before us, and we must work together to part the waters, and we must travel together toward the promised land. So with apologies to anyone here who has a uterus, bear down, people. I fear the contractions are getting closer, and it's come time to push. Shabbat Shalom. Cotzin.